I don't give a fuck if this fucking shitbag dad of hers didn't like actually abuse them or whatever. It just doesn't fucking matter to me. What matters to me is the neglect, alright? Okay? The neglect you could have for your own, especially your child. Like, there was no love. There was nothing. Yumiko felt literally nothing. And her life's been shit. And it's like I know I've been spewing a lot of hate for like all these characters already, because I'm just I don't there's certain things I don't like to forgive necessarily. Um but you know, it I don't know, it's just I hate 4 seasons sometimes. Just when I'm finally starting to forget, an autumn wind blows up to remind me of a whispered insult. Winter skies bring back cold and lonely memories. And in summer, when the sudden evening storms arrive, I'm torn apart with every clap of thunder. Again and again until there's nothing left. 1 year after my mother's relapse, things had quieted down. The commotion at the hospital created a bit of a stir around town, but it didn't take long for the talk to trickle to a halt. For one thing, the main character in the story was no longer a resident. And even our cold-hearted country gossips seemed hesitant to turn a gravely ill woman's condition into one of their nasty little jokes. And, not to mention, this relapse was caused because, you know, she found out, oh, we're gonna get divorced, oh, he might have a mistress, what if he does? Which makes him even worse of a person. Like, we don't know if it's actually true or not, even though it was part of a credible, a magazine that had credibility, but still, you never know. It might be false, so we can't really say for sure on that one. But he's still not that good of a person, in my honest opinion. Anywho, I was absent from school for a week after the incident, recovering from the shock and a mild case of pneumonia, but my life eventually returned to its normal rhythm, which is being shit on all day. That would be the superficial summary, at least. The trauma of reading that magazine article led to a dramatic downturn in my mother's condition. She was now suffering from acute memory loss. Oh, that's what that was. Her physician, my grandparents, my father, and me. We were all strangers to Mom now. Everyone she met slipped out of her mind within minutes. These symptoms were far beyond anything a local hospital was equipped to handle. Soon after the incident, Mom was transferred to a specialized psychiatric institution in North Kanto. Well, ironically enough, that divorce never actually came to pass. Oh, perhaps my father backed off out of concern for his public image? Probably. That, or it was part of some conditional legal arrangement. I don't know. One thing, however, was perfectly clear. The connection between the Sakaki and Kawamoto houses had been severed. My two families spent the first months after the incident squabbling about by proxy, about legal issues and the care of their mutual burdens. In the end, the Sakaki continued to cover my mother's medical expenses, but they were no longer providing supplementary support to the Kawamoto family's floundering business.
美佐子の件だけは責任を取らせたけど、これで支援もなくなって、どうするつもりですか、あなた。
As far as I'm aware, you guys deserve everything that comes to you.
つつましくやっていけばなんとかなる。すまんが、しばらくは我慢をしてくれんか。
歴史のある川本の家がこんな粗末な生活をするようになるなんて。しかもあの子の面倒まで見なければいけないなど、こんなバカな話がありますか？
Oh yeah, because I'm the real problem here, you know? Fuck you.
まったく、なぜこんなことになってしまったのかな。
You were terrible people. That's what you did. Even long after the matter was settled, my grandparents never seemed to tire about moaning about the unfairness of it all. And of course, as the easiest target for their bitterness, I once again found myself wedged between a rock and a hard place. I had the bare minimum required for a normal life. They always kept up appearances after all, but not a day went by when I didn't hear sarcastic, scornful words from the shadows. I went to a silent school and returned to a silent home, and silent. I lost my refuge, my hope. All I could do was suffer, quietly. Oh. This would be the point where a normal person might go bad, but I had been living inside a cage for so long that was not even a choice available to me. There was a time, just once, when I tried approaching a group of girls with that sort of reputation. The result was pathetic. In that country town, even the delinquents were mindful of appearances. They turned their backs on me and walked away without a word. Wow. Shunned even by the lowest on the totem pole, for a long moment I just stood there, rooted to the spot. And then I found myself looking up at the sky, as most visual novel people do. It looked no different from the day I'd gazed out the window with my mother. Had Mom always been alone? Was that why she'd spent so much time watching something that never really changed? Now that I was well and truly isolated, I'd begun to think more about her feelings. Oh, feels real bad. It seemed like a moment worthy of a little sobbing, but it just wasn't happening. On that day in the rain, I'd used up my lifetime supply of tears. All that was left was a parched, withered husk of a human being. Oh, feels worse, man. God damn. God. A day in early September. Our teacher had fallen ill that afternoon. The final lesson was replaced by a study hall, which I'd spent gazing dully out the window. That exercise in pure boredom finally complete, I was walking sluggishly down the road towards my grandparents' house. Just turning the final corner onto our street. Something was wrong about this picture. A shiny, black luxury car was parked along the thickly hedged road in front of our house. Oh. The Kawamoto family didn't own a private automobile. My grandfather apparently had one back in the days when the business was doing well, but it was one of the first things to go when the recession hit. The negotiations with the Sakaki family had always been held in the business office by the station, so it was hard to imagine why such a car could have possibly come. Is that her dad? Oh shit, man. For a little while, I dawdled outside, staring curiously at the car with its thickly tinted windows. But after 2 or 3 minutes, a voice called out to me from inside our house.
遅かったじゃないの、Yumikoちゃん。早く上がって。
Oh, you sound fucking excited. Oh, is Dad coming to pick us up? Is that what this is? And that's why she's excited, because she doesn't have to deal with our shit. And by our shit, I mean existence. I was startled. The friendly attitude was one thing, but it was the very first time since I'd arrived that my grandmother had actually called me by name. That's so sad. She wouldn't have done that without a very good reason. After quickly removing my shoes, I let her usher me into the parlor. It was the first time in a good 4 years that I'd been in that room. The instant I crossed the threshold, 5 men in black suits stood up simultaneously and bowed in greeting. As I blinked in bewilderment, my grandmother spoke, a strange little smile twisting her face.
ほら、そこに座って。Yumikoちゃんが話に入らないと進まないことなんだから。
Okay. And with that, she sat me at the head of the table. The dusty air of the rarely used parlor tickling my nose, I looked around me. All 5 of the men had deeply serious expressions on their faces. To be honest, I wanted nothing more than to run away.
一体何の話なんですか？こんな急に。
God, you remember when Yumiko sounded happy? As a kid? As soon as the question left my mouth, a man seated to the left took control of the conversation.
お父様、榊道明様の命により、由美子様をお迎えに上がりました。
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Here it comes.
お迎えに。
はい。お父様は昨年の一件で、由美子様をとても心配していらっしゃいました。
Okay.
それで、こうしてお迎えに上がった次第です。
Okay, maybe Dad slightly cares a little bit. Slightly. Maybe. We'll see. We'll see about this. What on earth was this man talking about? After the incident with my mom, my father hadn't shown up in the house even once. I understood that he had a busy professional life, but he didn't even bother to send a message or place a phone call. Now they expected me to believe he was worried? Now? After a full year? Ridiculous. It was mystifying Grandma had let them into the house, let alone with that simpering grin on her face. Didn't she understand this was nonsense? But soon I discovered that my grandmother's reactions were perfectly lucid, for reasons that had nothing to do with any of that.
よかったわね、由美子ちゃん。これでいい学校に通えるし、お父様とも一緒に住めるのよ。
Yep, she's only happy because I'm leaving. That's it.
いろいろあったが、これからは何の心配もしないで暮らせるんだ。よかったな。
You guys can just go to hell.
お父様からもまたこの家を助けていただけるそうで、本当によかったわ。
Fucking, I'm so triggered. Ah, now I understood. This was a question with no choices. My grandparents had decided the answer beforehand and were now unilaterally forcing me into it. I was so profoundly astonished at their naked self-interest that I couldn't even manage any anger. But it's not as if snapping at them would have achieved anything in the first place. Remaining with them was probably never really an option.
わかりました。すぐに準備をしてきます。
Yep, you're probably better off, Yumiko, honestly. When I stood for my seat, my grandmother spoke in a sickeningly sweet voice.
あらあら、そこまで急がなくてもいいのよ。榊家の方は明日もまたいらっしゃるというし、それまで。
いえ、結構です。今いらっしゃってるのなら、その車に乗っていきます。
Dude, Yumiko, no nonsense right now. Just like, what the hell?
あら、そうなの？由美子ちゃんがそう言うのなら仕方ないわよね、あなた。
No nonsense.
ああ、もちろんそうだ。由美子のいいようにすればいいからな。
Honestly, I'd probably be like, okay, you know what? I don't even care. I want to go home. I want to go back. I was about ready to vomit. From my grandmother's words, it seemed clear that Sakaki had come with a clear offer in hand. My return in exchange for restored financial support to the Kawamoto business. My grandparents had considered me a burden from the start, so I imagine they didn't exactly hesitate. Oh no, they probably said it, and without even them finishing, they were like, oh, we'll do it! Yep. Probably felt like selling some piece of junk from the backyard for a huge sum at an auction. Oh. I tried muttering the words but couldn't manage such conviction. After all, I was scuttling around the same sordid. How could I complain? I wasn't working for my food. Oh. I pulled all my clothes out of the chest of drawers, threw them onto my tatami mat and scowled down at them. Just sets it all on fire. I wasn't speaking to my grandparents, the house, or even my mother. It was a farewell to the person who had lived here, idly wasting day after empty day, accomplishing nothing by growing older. I spoke those words to confirm a simple fact. That room was nothing to me. It held nothing of me. Ooh. One by one, I cut the clothes I'd worn in the place to shreds. Is this the same box cutter? Like that she has now? Like, actually the same? Or is she, like, actually just ripping up with her hands? The expensive looking children's clothes I'd bought with me, the generic ready-made supermarket clothes my grandparents had bought me when the need arose, my middle school uniforms, my face and emotionless mask, I carefully chopped them into tiny pieces. There you go. You get that out of your system. My preparations were complete. Grabbing the scrapped clothes with both hands, I shoved them right back into the chest of drawers. That is, what if you looked in there, and of course you weren't Yumiko, and you just, like, looked in there, you're like, It took less than a minute to toss my everyday belongings, art supplies, and sketchbooks into my bag. Just like that, my life in this place was over. I didn't look back. Oh, making my way back. After a stiff, formulaic goodbye to my grandparents, with a little fuck you at the end, I dropped by my school for brief formalities, then began the journey home. Of course, I hadn't seen that home in many years. I had only the vaguest memories of the house itself. I was sincerely happy to be leaving my grandparents behind, but that didn't make me any less uncertain about the new life being thrust upon me so abruptly. The car headed north at high speed, moving from the coastline into the outskirts of the metropolitan area. We were heading for the heart of West
あ
Tokyo.
とどれぐらいで着くのですか？
I forgot to piss. An elderly man who had introduced himself as the chief of clerical department at my father's company was behind the wheel.
車が混んでいなければ、あと30分もすれば着くかと存じます。
30 minutes? Shit, man, that's not bad. Glancing briefly at his GPS screen, he answered my question in a calm tone.
そうですか。
60 kilometers, as the crow flies. That was the distance from my grandparents' house to that of my father. In the end, my mother had never managed to return to a place less than an hour away by car. And I myself was only coming back on someone else's power. I didn't have the slightest idea what was coming next. I wasn't particularly hopeful, but I didn't feel much in the way of despair either. It would be enough if I could just spend my days quietly until I finally became an adult. With that thought, I closed my eyes and waited for the car to arrive at its destination. Maybe we'll be better. I don't know. It's probably just going to be worse. Just as the chief secretary had told me, we reached my new home in about 30 minutes. Hello.
大きい。
The house was very different from the patchwork image I had sewn together from fragments of my childhood memories. Far more magnificent than I remembered. From the outside, the building itself looked like a Western-style mansion straight out of a manga. The spacious gardens were surrounded by a high wall. The grounds were covered in so many tall, beautiful trees that it could have been a park. You know, this might be a good start. Good fresh start. I had hazy memories of those things, but after years in the country, their scale and magnificence took me by surprise. But on an emotional level, the sight left me cold. My father's actions were one thing, my obedient return at his whistle was another. No matter how splendid the house might have been, when I thought about the foundation it was built on, my thoughts naturally took a turn for the bitter.
お母さんと戻ってこられたら。
Your mom ain't ever coming back. I whispered the words to myself, too softly for the driver taking my luggage from the trunk to hear. Passing through a finely wrought metal gate, I returned to the house I spent my first years in. It's been years since we've been. Years! The uninspiring luxury was all the more pronounced inside the house itself. As I took off my shoes and looked around the gleaming entrance hall, I heard footsteps approaching from the side passage. Oh?
Yumiko, 戻ったか。大きくなったな。
Yeah, thanks, Dad, for never being a part of my fucking life! It probably would have taken me some time to recognize the person standing in front of me, if not for the recent photograph I'd seen in a certain magazine 1 year before. Face to face with my father for the first time in what felt like decades, I saw a middle-aged man with a reasonably healthy complexion, but a subtle hint of something like gloom in his
た
eyes.
だいま戻りました。
As I lowered my head in a polite bow, my father continued in the same cheerful tone.
どうした？声に元気がないじゃないか。車に長い時間乗ったから疲れたのか。
Yeah. I feel like when you've been emotionally destroyed for your whole life, this is what you turn into. This is what I've become, Father.
あの、
I was more taken aback than anything else. Considering the way he had treated Mom and me up until that point, his aggressively friendly attitude was incomprehensible. Yeah, it's really different. From what I could remember, my father and I had only spoken a bare handful of times when I was a child, and certainly never like that. His motives weren't clear to me, but the sudden attempt at intimacy was off-putting. I didn't quite know how to respond to it.
大丈夫です。ちょっとお部屋に戻って休みます。
For the moment, I just wanted to cut the nauseating conversation short.
ああ、わかった。ユミコの好きなようにするといいよ。
Yeah, whatever I want.
失礼します。
With another bow to my father, I made my way past him, heading for the one part of the house I remembered well. My very first place of refuge, the bedroom in which I had spent so many hours as a young child. Is it gonna... Oh, I climbed the stairs and found the room without the slightest hesitation. Remembering its location so exactly prompted a brief swell of nostalgic emotion, but that soon gave way to that reassuring sense of disgust. Reassuring disgust? That's not a thing. Recurring sense of disgust. My memories there weren't exactly happy in their own right. Hey, the room I entered for the first time in years was so completely changed that I couldn't help raise my voice in surprise. The badly mismatched desk and bed had been cleared away. In their place was a complete arrangement of fancy furniture and pretty little luxury items, exactly the sort of things that might appeal to a girl my age.
わざわざ揃えたのかしら。
If a girl my age was actually normal and not fucked up. Every part of the decor seemed as if it could have come straight from the set of a movie. The room was filled with fragile, ephemeral things. Felt as though they'd disappear like soap bubbles if I actually touched them. Normally, that would have made me happy, but at the moment, it seemed a hollow gesture.
お母さん、帰ってきたわよ。
Sitting on my bed, I murmured those words to myself. I had finally managed to return to that house, but my mother wasn't with me. All I had there was a forced artificial welcome from the man who had broken her. Would I simply resume the same numb, miserable life in a different setting? Staring up at the ceiling, I could feel this familiar jet black sludge growing thick inside my chest. Ooh. I fought down the crushing feelings of despair as best I could, closed my eyes and fell asleep. Well, that's... Next day, huh? Oh, new school. Next day, my father arranged beforehand for my transfer into an all-girls school some 20 minutes from the mansion by car. It was a very prestigious institution. I'd actually recognize the name. I felt badly out of place, uncomfortable with my new uniform and the beautiful school building.
ねえ、あの子が。
Yes, I'm famous.
そうよね。榊家の。
Yes, kneel before me. I could hear the whispers from all sides. Entering the classroom, I sat quietly at the open desk as far as the others as possible. There was an improvement in one regard. The talk about me wasn't particularly cruel or hostile.
訳ありなのよね。
What do you mean?
ええ、ちょっとお近づきには。
I'm salty. What do you want? But essentially, I was treated just like before. My classmates interacted with me in a business-like way when necessary, and otherwise largely pretended it didn't exist. A school full of young ladies from upper-crust families was unsurprisingly comfortable in its own way. Yep, I figured it'd be.
いい天気。
Dude, her voice is like she is actually dead. Like, if... Like, I wouldn't be surprised if her pulse wasn't actually going right now. Having completed my formulaic introduction and the first day of classes, I found myself instinctively heading for the rooftop. After gazing up for a moment, I settled down against a concrete support near the edge of the roof and took out my sketchbook. I began to draw the sky above me. A simple pencil hatching, rendering the clouds and sky in shades of gray. That afternoon, I couldn't stand to look at the world. Anything my eyes settled on repulsed me. That empty sky was the only thing I could bring myself to observe calmly. Jesus, Yumiko. The driver held open the front door to the house for me. Thanks, man. I was delivered to school and back. I didn't even have to open my own doors anymore. You know, that's fucking sweet. Wonder what it's like. Is this what it's like to be rich? That extreme courtesy only intensified my discomfort.
お帰りなさいませ。
Thanks, servant. Servant, get me some tea! The household employees greeted me with smiles so soft and mild it was slightly nauseating. When I answered with a brief nod, they began to bombard me with words in rapid succession, their tones eager and openly professional.
由美子様、何か召し上がりますか？
What does Yumiko like eating? Crepes. Give me some crepes.
いえ、結構です。部屋へ戻ります。
Fuck.
では何かお飲み物をお持ちしましょうか。
それも結構です。喉は渇いておりませんから。
We are dealing with a corpse here, ladies and gentlemen.
それでは何かありましたらお申し付けください。
I mean, it's also kind of it is definitely a new life, and I get why she. I mean, I'd be salty the whole time. I'd be like, ugh, I don't, you know.
はい
Well. Climbing slowly up the stairs, I heaved a heavy sigh. Would they be putting on that sort of show every single day from now on? Yes! Their deference was so transparently artificial that it was painful rather than flattering. Given my current position, it might just be possible to order them to stop acting like that. You totally could! But I don't know if that, I didn't know what repercussions that would have, especially if they were to report it to my father. I ended up deciding it was best to not make waves at such an early stage. I'd been able to postpone it for one day with excuses about my fatigue, but the time had come.
久しぶりだね。こうしてユミコと食事をとるのは。
Try like a million years. A glass of wine in one hand, my father turned a radiant smile on me. Uh-huh. Inside my head, I spat out the words, "It's the first time, yup." There it is! From the moment I sat down in front of the luxurious dinner and beamed my beaming father, I was immediately filled with a desperate longing to flee. I tried a little of the sauteed duck on my plate just to kill a few seconds, but it seemed strangely tasteless and without texture. Dealing with a corpse!
学園の先生から褒められたよ。転入する際の成績が抜群だったとね。これなら学校間のレベル差はほとんど関係ないとのことだった。
My father, still maintaining the same cheerful tone as the night before, complimented me at great length. All I could manage was to nod mechanically, and not nod mechanically, well, yes, and mechanically shovel the food placed in front of me into my mouth. Course after course, I couldn't taste a thing. Well, had they even put any salt on these? It was like eating hunks of rubber. Yumiko, calm down. Carrying things to my mouth solely for the sake of chewing on them didn't make for a pleasant dining experience. Gradually, I began to ignore my plate in favor of frequent sips of water.
気持ち悪い
The tasteless food, Dad's barrage of praise, and myself sitting there passively just accepting it all. Everything about the scene made me sick. My emotions only grew darker with every passing minute. This was all some bizarre whim of my father's. That or a meaningless ceremony he was carrying out in pursuit of some hidden objective, which we all totally know. What else could it be?
ユミコ、髪はずっと伸ばしているのか？
Why'd my heart beat? I actually had a heartbeat. Holy shit, I'm alive! I felt my breath catch in my throat. Oh, let's not remember that day. That summer day, the day when the heat had poured down on me like a rain of molten iron. Yeah, remember that day? I remember. I didn't want to remember. The moment when I clawed at my chest and hacked at my own hair in a spasm of self-loathing. It all came flooding vividly back. She literally was like trying to push her breasts in. Oh my god. That was a horrible scene.
はい
Made me feel so sad. I almost told him that I'd cut it short once. But what would be the point of explaining that to this man? It would only throw this little play into chaos. What on earth did my father mean by asking me a question like that? Small talk? Why bring up the very thing that had always marked me as worthless? Oh, you just stop it.
そうか。とてもよく似合ってるよ。
See? He says you're nice. It's fine. It's okay, Yumiko. Yuji's gonna fix all your problems. Everything's gonna be fine. My father, smile on his face, spoke those words in a casual tone of voice. Oh.
ユミコ、
Did she just fucking choke on her shit?
すみません
Oh no, she's about to throw up. Rising from my seat, I ran out of the room, both hands pressed tightly across my mouth.
おい、何か体に合わないものがあったんじゃないのか？
Oh my god. Fire the chef! Jesus. I could hear my father snarling at someone behind me, but I didn't have time to be worrying about that. Damn, that made her throw up. Acid burned my mouth as I vomited the tasteless food out into the toilet bowl. None of it had the slightest flavor going down, but coming back up, it was powerfully unpleasant. It seemed a bit unfair somehow. I remember this one time, I don't know what it was, but I don't throw up often. I know this is a little detour, but I just felt like saying it. I threw up pure blackness. It was really weird. I don't know what it was. Never happened again. And we like to meme that I threw up my evil. So, that happened.
何を勝手なこと。
Wasn't my sex the entire reason he'd cast Mom aside? Why on earth was my father thinking? How could he say that? Why? Well, he never even looked at me before. This had to be some kind of a whim. He decided to play house for a while to appease his guilty conscience. Either that or he needed to do so for some work-related reason.
ひどい。
How long would it take before I could find a safe haven? Well, you know, speaking of which, can we return back to Yuji? This was no better than living with my grandparents. No, in the countryside, at least I wasn't expected to do anything. There were expectations of me here. That made it even more agonizing.
何もしたくないのに。
That is not good. Tasting the acid rising once more from the depths of my throat, I descended into self-pity. I would truly have preferred to shut myself up in a dark shed, to reject the world and do nothing at all for the rest of my life. But so long as I needed food to eat and a bed to sleep in, I had no choice but to play along with my father's momentary kindness. The thought triggered a new wave of nausea. God damn it. Yumiko, it's been a few days. 1 week passed. Yep. People often say that time flies when you're having fun. Perhaps it's true because those first 7 days seemed to last a century. Hanging my bag next to my desk, I pulled out my notes and textbooks. I was as isolated and out of place as ever in my new school. I'd been studying a good deal, but that was simply my way of killing the vast stretches of otherwise painfully empty times I spent here. It certainly had absolutely nothing to do with my father's praise. Certainly not. I hadn't sketched in it for a few days now. For one thing, the weather had been dull and gray, so I couldn't look up without remembering that day. Oh, let's not. And see, that's why she's afraid. Doesn't like the rain and the thunder and shit. And I just hadn't been in the mood in the first place. Even if I opened my sketchbook today, I'd only end up with another drawing of the sky, as if I didn't have enough of those already. Those vaguely self-mocking thoughts stopped me on the way to the roof, redirecting my path down to the lower floor. My life was a steady line from one meaningless moment to the next. It still feels batty, man. What's happening here? That was weird. Human beings are frighteningly adaptable creatures. The meals with my father that had at first repulsed me to the point of vomiting were gradually growing tolerable. Dude, that chef got fired. Like, even he didn't cook anything wrong, because it's to a psychological level on Yumiko's part. But that chef got fucking fired. Sometimes I hated myself for that. But little by little, I was coming to understand that it wasn't just the result of my mind acclimating itself to the situation.
ユミコ、学校には慣れたか?
I guess.
はい。
いきなりの転校で戸惑ったかもしれんが、すぐに友達もできる。お父さんの時もだな。
What are friends? I don't know what friends are. My father was making a genuine effort with gentle advice and anecdotes about his own experiences. He tried to reassure me. You think he's actually being genuine, or is he just putting on a show? Like, it's kind of hard to think about, I guess, or I don't know. It could be one or the other. Like, that's what I personally think he's I think he probably does care, but at the same time there's definitely an ulterior motive. At least that's what I'm thinking. Anywho, apparently Dad had gone through many transfers in his student years and always struggled with how to present himself to his classmates. I was beginning to learn a number of surprisingly personal things about my father as he persistently tried to draw me into conversation.
ああ、そうか。今は時代も違うだろうからな。すまなかったな、ユミコ。
いいえ。
She just, And he wasn't pushy or arrogant about it. He always seemed to be considering my point of view. Just as I'd heard, Dad was on an extremely tight schedule. Even when he returned home, it was extremely rare for him to stay overnight. More frequently, he would return to his company immediately after dinner. But I mean, at least he's having dinner with you, and now, I guess. But that also meant he was coming home solely to share a meal with me. I gradually grew less prickly and slightly more communicative. By now, I could eat dinner with him without a hint of queasiness.
どうしたユミコ？
いえ、なんでも。
God damn it. Just as something was about to spill out of my mouth, Mom's pale, empty face had flashed before my eyes. Okay. I hate when it does that. Laying in the bed, in my darkened room, I thought things over. I was no less uncertain than when I first arrived at that place, but the reasons for the inner turmoil were beginning to change. My father's attitude toward me was becoming harder to process. At first, I'd simply been disgusted by his overfamiliarity. But by that point, it was harder to dismiss as some bizarre game. Sometimes I could almost take his friendliness at face value. Even that remark about my hair might have been intended as nothing more than a casual compliment. Such positive interpretations were beginning to seem plausible.
そんなの、今更よ。
Yeah, that time's long past. I tried mumbling negative words to myself, but the nagging doubts remained. My distant mother had grown kind when her condition improved. The situation was clearly different, but there was always the possibility my father had undergone a similar change in the years since I'd seen him last. Maybe. Tossing and turning in my bed, I turned the questions over in my mind. Yeah, but what happened? What about this mistress and this kid? Maybe they actually don't exist, you know? I've been so cold for so long. But little by little, I could feel something like warmth returning to my body. I'll just end up being betrayed again. This time will be no different. With two opposing answers battling indecisively in my mind, I waited for dawn to come. Oh, where am I? More school. 3 months! 3 months after my return to Tokyo, my life was beginning to change even outside of the house. School didn't seem particularly unpleasant anymore. It wasn't so difficult being alone in that place once you got used to it. And so as long as I quietly attended my class, the entire day would pass easily enough. I never disliked studying, so once my mood took a turn for the better, it didn't feel like wasted time. The change in the seasons had brought more periods of clear weather. I'd resumed my habit of drawing on a daily basis. And as my mind grew calm, my art slowly began to change as well. My perspective, pointed straight up for so long, began to creep downward. Every once in a while, I'd include a townscape or two among my sketches. Ah, there it is! Wasn't exactly principled of me to be finding enjoyment in that life, but there was no point in sulking forever. My sardonic feelings of self-reproach slowly faded. I began to look at the world around me more calmly. Thank God.
お帰りなさいませ。
Hello.
ただいま。
Even those brutally awkward interactions with the household employees had gotten more tolerable with the passage of time. After a few weeks, they picked up on my non-reactions and began to tone down their aggressive approach. They would generally back off after letting me know they were available if I needed them. That arrangement was much more comfortable for me. by then I actually was asking them for something every once in a while. They're probably like happy that Yumiko doesn't ask for things often. They're like, oh, we could slack off a little bit, yeah.
今日は部屋へすぐ戻られますか？ええ、そのようにします。かしこまりました。
Thank you, servant two. After asking the maid to have someone call me when it was time for dinner, I returned to my room. Oh, is it time for dad dinner? Sitting down in front of my desk, I thought back over the last few months. My attitudes toward that new life were beginning to soften in many ways. The one exception, I was stubbornly continuing to keep my father at arm's length. His behavior hadn't changed. He'd continued to treat me kindly all the while. Nonetheless, I offered him nothing but brief monosyllabic answers, vaguely avoiding his questions. That seemed only natural at first. What else could he expect after he treated my mother, or how he treated my mother? After abandoning me for years, that resentment seemed to justify my behavior. Yep. But months had passed, and I just couldn't see any sign of the cruel man I thought he was. At least not when he was interacting with me. But what changed? Nearly every night, I rejected his gentle attempts to draw me into conversation. My father didn't seem to be letting that bother him, but I was beginning to feel increasingly guilty about my attitude. I threw the question up at the ceiling, knowing all too well that no answer would be forthcoming. It would be time for dinner soon. For a very different reason than before, I'd started to find that time somewhat painful.
今日も由美子の話題が出てな。榊さんのお嬢さんは可愛くて聡明でいらっしゃると目黒医大の先生もおっしゃってたよ。
Well, I don't mean to brag, but I am fairly attractive.
はい。
由美子がこんなにいい子に育って父さんも嬉しいよ、本当に。
Well, Yumiko is a fine lady. You see her? See that booty? Don't be looking at my booty, Dad. This man had interacted with me as something close to an ideal father for 3 straight months. That day, as always, all that came out of his mouth were words of praise and concern for me. Uneasy feelings smoldered away quietly inside my chest.
なあ、由美子。
Uh-oh. My father spoke to me in a kind tone of voice. I couldn't endure his gaze. I found myself hanging my head.
由美子。
I didn't dislike being praised. Not at all. He was making time in an extremely busy life for me. I wasn't yet cynical enough to dismiss that. Sometimes I felt myself on the verge of being grateful. But no, not yet. That black grime was still inside me. There was always that other emotion struggling against my guilt. So long as that remained, I would never allow myself to get any closer to my father. Oh. Oh my god.
母さんのことか。
Ah, fuck. I felt myself twitch with surprise. Until that point, I had deliberately steered clear of that conversation. I'd assumed my father was intentionally avoiding it as well, so the turn of the conversation came as a real shock.
話して良いものかずっと迷っていたが、ちゃんと話さないと由美子も納得してはくれないということなんだろうな。
Okay, Dad. Explain.
そんな、私は。
Oh, don't even, Yumiko.
いいんだ。これは父さんが悪かったんだ。
Shit, man. He's even admitting he was wrong. My father slowly began to speak. He spoke about his feeling toward my mother, how it felt when she left, and behind everything, the constant stress his incredibly demanding job had placed on their marriage. Everything my father told me turned my image of him completely on its head.
二人が出て行った時、本当に辛かったよ。連れ戻しに行こうって何度も思った。でも仕事に追われてそれができなかった。
In time, my increasingly isolated father began to seek comfort. He admitted that the affair described in the magazine article had happened at that time. Okay.
父さんも寂しかったんだ。会社でもいろいろとあって、いけないことと知りつつも、母さんを裏切るようなことをしてしまった。
Okay, he's being real honest right now.
雑誌に記事が出たと聞いたとき、一番に考えたのは、母さんを巻き込んではいけないということだったんだ。それで弁護士を向かわせたんだが。
But then why did they hold me back? It was consistent. The actions that had seemed so inhumanely cruel at the time could also be explained by my father's story. After all, that lawyer never got a chance to speak with my mother. There was no proof that he'd been sent here to serve her with divorce papers. Yeah, but the way that dude, like, I don't know, it just really felt like it. But even so...
Yumiko.
Yes? My father looked straight at my face from across the table. I couldn't help myself. I returned his gaze. At some point, I'd forgotten even to avert my eyes.
お父さんを許してくれないか?
Oh shit, man. Oh, that's a heavy question. It was a gentle voice. I'd begun to think I would never hear a voice like that ever again from anyone. And yet it was coming from him, the person whose acceptance, in a way, I'd always wanted most. Might as well, Yumiko. Just... Many thoughts flooded into my head in a confused jumble. Those words were more than powerful enough. My fragile defensive wall had finally sprung a leak. Oh shit.
Yumiko.
ごめんなさい、お父さん。ちょっと、私。
Oh, well, I stood from my chair, turned away from that cornered, concerned face, and hurried out the hallway. Well, fire the chef again. Halfway covering my face with my right hand, I stumbled up the stairs as best I could. On the way up, I caught a glimpse of a servant staring at me in shock. But I wasn't composed enough to pay that any mind. Oh, this poor girl, man. The world was growing hazy before I even reached my floor. And the instant I closed the door to my room behind me, the tears came pouring down my face. One drop stained the ivory carpet beneath my feet, then another.
お父さん、あんなこと。
It was hard to understand. I couldn't reconcile the man with the vicious, vulgar person the magazines described. There were so many things about him that confused me. Yeah, me too! But I couldn't believe he'd spoken those words for show. It sounded as if they'd come from the heart. Yeah. Just as Mom had come to regret the cruel things she said to me, perhaps my dad was simply trying to make up for his mistakes. Looking at it from that angle, it wouldn't be so hard to accept his apology.
お母さん。
I had one photograph of my mother left, safe in the memory of my mobile phone. I was wondering what that beep was. But as always, her face was turned to the side. I couldn't read her expression.
今度こそ幸せになっても。
My life had been shades of gray, like the 50 Shades of Grey, for so very long. Little by little, I could see colors beginning to emerge. It was a pleasant feeling. And then shit happens, and you're pretty much fucked, Yumiko, and then you gotta go to this school, and your dad still wants you to run the business. Oh, it's just, I don't know, man. I'm getting so many conflicting emotions. So many different things happening. I don't know what to believe. I don't know what to believe. I don't know what to think. I don't know what to theorize about anymore. I just fucking don't know.